Heidi Elias has just returned from a long day at a Boca Raton retirement home, where she's a chaplain and gives sermons. It's Heidi's way of giving back to the community, and she usually enjoys it. But this Friday in March 2007 is a difficult one. She spent much of the day consoling a woman whose daughter is dying.
A woman there in one of the retirement homes, her daughter was dying and they were going to take her off a machine, but her daughter was in New York and this woman lived here in the retirement home and she was very, very upset. And so I sat and I talked to her, something like we're talking now, this, talk about the daughter. And I found it very fulfilling, but also very tiring.
Heidi has a grown daughter of her own, RANDI Gorenberg. So the visit is especially upsetting. When Heidi gets home, she lies down and turns on the 5 o'clock news. The picture on the TV shows police hovering over a body that's covered with a blanket. A woman had been shot to death and dumped from a car by a park, not far from Heidi's home.
I looked at this covered body and I said, oh my God, some family is going to be so upset tonight when they find out who that is. I said that to myself. I said it.
Later that evening, Heidi's family calls her. They break the crushing news. The murdered woman from the TV is RANDI.
And that's how I found out that that body that was lying on the ground at the Civic Center was the body of my daughter.
From the Sun Sentinel and SouthFlorida.com, in association with Wondery, this is Felonious Florida, the podcast that leads you into the dark side of the Sunshine State. I'm Juan Ortega, and this is the story of the Boca Mall murders. Episode 6, RANDI. On March 23rd, 2007, RANDI Gorenberg became the first of at least 5 victims of violent crimes that year that are all believed by authorities to have started at the Town Center Mall in Boca Raton, and the first of 3 who ended up dead. On August 7th, a woman and her 2-year-old son were kidnapped from the mall parking lot, driven to an ATM, and forced to withdraw hundreds of dollars. The mother was bound with zip ties and terrorized for more than an hour. She and her son survived. But another family, Nancy Boquicchio and her 7-year-old daughter, Joey, did not survive. In December, they were kidnapped at gunpoint from the same mall parking lot after an afternoon of Christmas shopping. They were also forced to drive to an ATM and withdraw $500. The mom and daughter were bound, shot and killed in their own SUV. Their bodies left in the back seat in the mall parking lot. The string of kidnappings and murders set the oceanside city of Boca Raton on edge and drew national attention. Some in the community wondered, Was there a serial killer on the loose? In fact, there were so few clues in any of the cases that investigators were struggling to even link them. Detective William Springer is a longtime investigator who led the cold case squad for the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office.
Randy Gorenberg, yeah, it's a cold case, and it could be a hot case tomorrow. You just never know. When the phone rings, it could be the lead we're looking for, and it becomes a hot case, and we could really run with it.
Randy's murder began just as all the others did. A day of shopping at the mall. That Friday morning, her final day, she's at home watching the Today Show on TV. It's a usual way the 52-year-old mother of two starts her days. The TV show on this day features a performance by singer John Legend. And Randy likes it so much, she decides she'll buy the album when she goes to the mall later.
That morning she was fine. She was going to town center. She was watching the Today Show, and John Legend was on there, and he was singing his latest recording, and she loved it. And she said to her son she's going to go to town center and buy that CD, because it was a beautiful CD.
Randy arrives to the town center mall about noon. She buys some shorts from Old Navy. She gets that John Legend CD. And about an hour after she arrived, the surveillance video shows her leaving through the Sears exit. She heads toward the car she's driving. It's a brand new black Mercedes SUV with dark tinted windows, parked in the mall lot. Then she's out of sight. What happens to Randy next is a mystery. But it's the last time she's seen alive and well.
We believe that she was probably abducted at the town center mall, since there's no other activity on her credit cards, or we were never able to locate anybody that saw her after leaving the mall. We have her on videotape leaving the mall.
Randy Gorenberg, a native New Yorker, was born on March 8, 1955. She was Randy Mallett's when she was growing up in Brooklyn in the 1950s and 60s. Her older brother, Jerry Mallett's, remembers the fun he and his sister would have in the big city.
Growing up in Brooklyn is different from growing up in Florida, where everybody is, just walk out your door, you start playing with kids and you start doing things. They just went out and created their own fun, and with whoever was in the neighborhood at the time. And, a lot of times we found ourselves, on the same street, maybe playing with different people.
Randy met Stuart Gorenberg at a young age, and they married around 1979.
She met this young man, and they fell in love. And he was a chiropractor, and then they got married. We had a wonderful wedding. And then her husband loved Florida, especially Boca Raton. He investigated it and liked it, and he decided he wanted to move down here.
In the 1980s, Randy and Stuart's two children are born. First, their son Daniel, then a daughter, Sari. The family of four lived a good life in South Florida.
Randy Gorenberg was married to Stuart Gorenberg, who was a chiropractor. He had an office in Fort Lauderdale. They were, I would say, fairly wealthy people. They had a beautiful home in Boca. They had two nice cars. They had the new Mercedes that she was driving, a GL 450, I think it's the big SUV model. And like I say, it was just the average couple with two children and living a good life.
The Gorenberg family's home in the upscale community of Boniello Acres, west of Boca Raton, was worth $2.2 million. But despite their lifestyle, Randi was unpretentious and committed to her kids and her community.
I can say that if there was anything involving the kids, she was involved with that. If there was anything that people needed help with, she was involved with that. And she had a, good circle of friends.
Randi spent plenty of time volunteering. There's a picture of her in the archives of the South Florida Sun-Sentinel from 2002. She and another volunteer are at the local high school gym, putting the finishing touches together on a banner that would be used for a graduation ceremony. They're using scissors and tape to put the banner together. It's typical of how Randi would spend her spare time to help others. Family also was important to her. Her relatives lived across the country, like her brother, Jerry. He lived in Washington, D.C., but they still met as often as they could. A family picture of Randi shows her with a huge smile during a hike in the woods. Jerry remembers those hikes and the laughs that he'd share with his sister.
If you ask my wife what was one thing she would remember of all the times we spent together, she would say one time we were hiking in Colorado, and Randi and I just started singing together all the theme songs from TV shows when we were younger. Like, we both knew all of the words, and we knew every TV show. And Randi ate that up, and my wife couldn't believe that. Who are these people that they know these things?
When their father passed away in October 1979, their mom, Heidi, stayed in New York until years later. Then she remarried and moved to the Sunshine State. With Heidi and Randi now living in South Florida, Randi grew even closer to her mom.
They did almost everything together. It was, almost like it was a mother-daughter, but almost like a big sister kind of thing. They really hung out together a lot. They did things. They talked on the phone all the time, and this is before cell phones. And then when cell phones, then they really talked on the phone all the time.
Heidi says it was a happy time for her daughter, Randi.
She didn't walk, she bounced. She would walk into my house and, "Hi, Mom," it was like a breath of fresh air. She was just that kind of a person. Her personality was shining.
The two talked on the phone regularly. Thursday night, March 22nd, 2007, was no different. But it was the last time Heidi spoke to her daughter. The next day, Randi was dead. Hi, this is Juan Ortega. Audiobooks are great sidekicks for summer activities like hiking, sunbathing on the beach, running, road tripping, relaxing outdoors, and more. Audible has the largest selection of audiobooks on the planet, which lets you fill your summer with more stories like The 57 Bus, a true story of two teenagers and the crime that changed their lives. Or Joe Kenda's I Will Find You, solving killer cases from Kenda's life of fighting crimes. And Hard Tide, Johnny Assa's first book in his Florida Coast Adventure series. And now Audible is offering listeners of Felonious Florida a free title with a 30-day trial membership. To take advantage of Audible's free audiobook offer, just for Felonious Florida listeners, go to audible.com/Florida or text Florida to 500-500 and start browsing their huge selection. Downloads from Audible are yours to keep. Go back and re-listen anytime, even if you cancel your membership. And Audible members get a credit every month, good for any audiobook in their store. Listening is a better way to binge content you love while doing the things you love. Download a title free and start listening today. It's that easy. Go to audible.com/Florida or text Florida to 500-500 to get started today. It's just before 2 p.m. on March 23rd, 2007. A beautiful early spring day. Governor Lawton Childs Memorial Park is about 5 miles from the Town Center Mall, in a lush suburban neighborhood northwest of Boca Raton. It's surrounded by lakes, gardens, and golf courses. But the tranquility would end in broad daylight. A dark Mercedes enters a small road that serves as a driveway to the park. And people nearby hear gunfire. The witnesses turn to the Mercedes and see Randi Gorenberg being pushed out the passenger side door. She's been shot in the head at point-blank range.
We get a call about shots fired, and we find the deceased lying in the roadway.
There were no witnesses who saw Randi being kidnapped from the mall parking lot. But that's exactly what detectives believe happened. They say Randi's kidnapper had driven her along that road at the park, against her will, in her family's Mercedes. Randi, sitting in the passenger seat, apparently tried to break free.
We believe that when she pulled into that, they were pouring into that parking lot, that she was attempting to jump out of the vehicle. And this could have possibly caused the person to either panic or just shoot her.
After pushing her out the door, the kidnapper drove away in the Mercedes. Minutes later, at 1:59 p.m., a security camera at a Home Depot captured the SUV entering the parking lot. It's about 2 miles from where Randi was shot to death.
And up the road behind the Home Depot, the perpetrator dumped her car. And that was basically...
That's how the show jumped on the case quickly.
Well, we were watching Randi Gorenberg's case very closely because it was a very unusual case, and we wanted to do whatever would help law enforcement at that time. Within a couple of weeks, we decided to focus on that case, highlight Randi's case on our show.
The first segment about Randi Gorenberg would be the first of several that would air over the years. But little progress is made toward making an arrest. Later, in 2007, the public is stunned by 2 more horrifying crimes that both began at the same mall.
But who knew at that time that within the next few months, there would be another case that had possible ties, and then another case that would make this 3 possible cases all linked to the same person. At that time, when we covered Randi's case, we had no idea that this was going to develop into something so much bigger, where eventually we brought John Walsh and the entire show out there. So we just never know when these things happen, but we're always open to it. And to this day, this case boggles the minds of people who worked at America's Most Wanted, even now, 10 years later.
And by the December murders of Nancy and Joey Bochicchio, some in the community of Boca Raton wonder why the police didn't do more to warn them. The mayor at the time, Stephen Abrams.
Sure, it was a horrendous crime in in our busy mall at Christmas time, and so the public, understandably, extremely apprehensive. On the other hand, everyone in the public also wanted to solve the case. So law enforcement has to strike that balance between the information that they are able to give the public to try to allay their fears and reassure them against putting information out that the perpetrator might see.
The second kidnapping, the one in August, had gone virtually unnoticed by the public. The mother and her 2-year-old son were not using their names to protect their identities, survived a harrowing, hour-long ordeal. The mother had been bound with zip ties and handcuffs and driven to the ATM at gunpoint to withdraw money from her account. The kidnapper took him back to the mall parking lot and vanished. Police issued a brief news release after the incident. It announced an investigation of a, quote, alleged armed robbery that was reported to have occurred at the mall. The local news didn't report it. Lawyers for the victim say detectives didn't seem to believe her account of the attack at the time. This is Walter Skip Campbell, one of the lawyers who represented the woman. He became a Florida state senator and is now the mayor of Coral Springs, Florida.
You know, they said that she set the whole thing up herself, and she was doing it to make her boyfriend mad, and she was just very upset about that.
Boca Raton police acknowledged that they initially had a little doubt about the woman's account. Some things just didn't add up in the early stages of the investigation. First, the victim told police that her kidnapper took her and her son on Florida's Turnpike during the hour-long ordeal. The highway is a toll road. It's equipped with sensors that read devices on cars for billing. When police received records from the turnpike, there was nothing indicating that the woman's SUV had passed through the tolls. Was she ever even on the turnpike? Those doubts dried up when they discovered it was some sort of glitch in the turnpike toll system. It had prevented them from seeing records of the woman's SUV on the highway. So they reportedly obtained surveillance video from the toll plaza, and there it was. The video showed the vehicle going through. Police also may have been dubious of her story because of shifting descriptions the woman gave of her attacker. In a TV interview after the attack, the victim said the man instructed her to give a false description of him, hoping it would throw the police off his tail. He told her to tell the cops that he was short, fat, and black. Her kidnapper had a strategy to scare her even after he was gone. He had taken her driver's license. It had her home address. And he said he would come after her if he ever saw his picture on the news. Boca Raton's mayor at the time says that happened, but the victim had good reason to provide an alternate description.
They were terrorized to the point where the perpetrator told them, if you reveal any, my description, or, give the police any clues, I know where you live, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to kill you. So naturally, that victim was absolutely terrorized. She then, was not giving the police department the accurate information. So they were tracking down, some false leads. Again, quite understandably, if it had, been the case where, me or my family member would have been the subject of that kind of terror, we would have done the same thing. We had the initial description, which was like 180 degrees different than the ultimate description that was released, and that is the outstanding description to this day.
Abrams, who said he was getting updates from the police and city manager at the time, said the varying descriptions did prove to be an initial challenge in the case.
And for them to be so different really set the police back a little at first, because, of course, everybody was on the lookout for someone who was an entirely different appearance than ultimately was the description of the actual perpetrator.
The woman, identified by police only as Jane Doe for her security, got a call a few months after her kidnapping. It was the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, and it was the first sign to her that police were starting to investigate all three mall attacks together. When the sheriff's office phoned Jane Doe,
I believe in this day and age, but they did not have an ATM card. They used their credit cards. They had 2 credit cards that they used to purchase items with, that they got airline miles for and benefits for. And for some reason, they never obtained an ATM card. So I imagine whoever abducted Randy was probably pretty upset, or probably couldn't figure out why this woman didn't have an ATM card. I mean, if you're going to commit a crime like that, and that's what they did with the other 2, is you take them to an ATM and you get your money out of the ATM, which they were not able to do with Randy because she didn't have an ATM card.
the kidnapper may have had no choice but to try to improvise.
So they're kind of at a dead end. I mean, is she going to write a check and go up through the teller to get money? I don't think they want that, because then they're pretty visible to the teller, but maybe that was their idea. I don't know. Or maybe they took her someplace else, searched, trying to find an ATM card, because her purse is missing and her shoes are missing. So they definitely took her to another location, whoever abducted her, possibly looking for those items. When they couldn't find them, he just maybe got frustrated.
As police investigated, they saw enough similarities between the cases to look into whether the three kidnappings were linked. Among the similarities, Randy Gorenberg left the Town Center Mall through the very same exit as Nancy and Joey Boquicchio did later that year. Police organize a massive multi-agency investigation and begin searching for the man described by host John Walsh of America's Most Wanted as a cunning, cold-blooded killer. Felonious, Florida is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Hiring? Every business needs great people and a better way to find them. Something better than posting your job online and just praying for the right people to see it. ZipRecruiter knew there was a smarter way, so they built a platform that finds the right job candidates for you. ZipRecruiter learns what you're looking for, identifies people with the right experience, and invites them to apply to your job. These invitations have revolutionized how you find your next hire. In fact, 80% of employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site in just one day. And ZipRecruiter doesn't stop there. They even spotlight the strongest applications you receive so you never miss a great match. Businesses of all sizes trust ZipRecruiter for their hiring needs. And right now, Felonious Florida listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/Florida. That's ZipRecruiter.com/Florida. The right candidates are out there. ZipRecruiter is how you find them. ZipRecruiter.com/Florida. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. A month had passed since Nancy and Joey Bochicchio were killed. With all three attacks linked to the Boca Mall gaining nationwide attention, the Boca Raton Police and the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office teamed up. A task force was set up, and 10 detectives were assigned to work together on the unsolved cases. Boca Raton Police Captain Matthew Duggan recalls how the killings outraged the community.
Law enforcement, the community, politicians, the media, everybody really rallied around this because there was there were unifying factors in this. When you see a 7-year-old child just can't put it any other way, executed, it makes everybody want to help. It outrages everybody.
In early 2008, the TV show America's Most Wanted visited Boca Raton to produce its biggest episode yet on the killings. It included reenactments. The show was hosted by John Walsh. He's the father of Adam Walsh, a 6-year-old boy who was killed in 1981 after being abducted from a Sears store in Hollywood, Florida, not far from Boca Raton.
For John, these cases were very personal. Not only are you talking about mothers being targeted in the middle of the day, in broad daylight, in public places, but this is South Florida. He has been a Florida resident for a long, long time. Anybody in South Florida knows the Walsh family and what they went through and can connect with his personal story. When he heard about this, he wanted to go out there and meet personally with the people who are connected with this case, law enforcement, the victims' family members.
John Walsh visited the park where Randy Gorenberg's killer left the body. Standing next to the sheriff of Palm Beach County, Walsh declared he believes a serial killer was responsible for the slayings. He called the killer a monster. Angeline Hartman remembers how the show considered whether that term would be used on the show. She said the show didn't take the use of the term lightly.
At the time of the show, we were careful to use the word serial killer. We always are, because we know that raises alarms for people. Law enforcement is very careful not to use the word serial killer lightly. John Walsh knows what happens when that word is used, when that term is used. So he doesn't use that term lightly either, but that's what he felt in his gut. He's calling it like he sees it, and he has the experience to say that, and he's speaking from the heart. He's looked at the evidence. He's talked to people. He's talked to law enforcement. There's too many similarities to not say, to make this call. And so it's not that far-fetched. It's just that at the time, John Walsh, had the guts to use those words and to come out and say, I think this is the work of the serial killer. And that's not the first time he's done that. He's worked on other cases throughout his tenure at America's Most Wanted where law enforcement wouldn't say something, and he just went ahead and said it. And years later, he was proven to be right.
John Walsh may have drawn those conclusions, but local authorities were not making that leap. Why? In the case of serial killers, it usually involves a string of killings and multiple attacks. Investigators on the task force felt certain that the Boquicchio murders were connected to the August 7th kidnapping, but the victims in August were not killed. In the Randy Gorenberg case, detectives had not found forensic evidence that linked her to the others. Boca Raton Police Captain Matthew Duggan remembers reaching that point in the investigation.
We got to the point where we were unable to forensically link all three cases. We could absolutely link the Jane Doe case in August and the December homicides of Nancy and Joey.
For the police, there wasn't enough proof to declare the attacks the work of a serial killer. The task force was disbanded in 2009. Boca Raton Police and the Sheriff's Department continued their separate investigations of the cases while staying in touch with each other. Detective Springer says investigators haven't entirely abandoned the idea of a single attacker because it's still a possibility to this day.
You can't say they are and you can't say they aren't. I mean, when you got three women, the only difference is that Randy didn't have a small child. Maybe this was their first attempt at abducting a woman out of the mall, and they really didn't plan it that well. They just saw this wealthy woman getting into a high-end SUV, and they figured this is a good target.
The investigation into Randy Gorenberg's killing has led detectives from one dead end to another. Some of the police theories about the Gorenberg case have played out publicly. Not long after Randy was killed, the sheriff's office had turned its attention to two members of Randy's family. It was held at the Gorenberg home in accordance with religious tradition. It brought friends and family to gather in memory of Randy. Guy Fronston, a family lawyer, recalls it was no small gathering. At least 60 people showed up. And he says, it's about that time when deputies showed up. It amounted, he said, to a raid on the Gorenberg home in the middle of the Shiva. Guests were ordered to leave immediately. They weren't given a chance to grab their keys, purses, shoes, and other belongings.
And it was extremely traumatic for the family that in the middle of this Jewish ceremony that the police would barge into the home and begin searching it.
As friends and family reacted to being forced to leave, some told the Gorenbergs, "You need a lawyer." They bring in Guy Fronston, and he would go on to represent both Dr. Stuart Gorenberg and his son Daniel throughout their ordeal. Over the next year, authorities put both in jail. Stuart and Daniel were both arrested separately on charges not related to Randy's death. Stuart was brought up on charges of insurance fraud related to practice as a chiropractor. Those charges later were dropped, and he was never convicted of anything. Randy's son Daniel faced fraud charges related to prescription drugs. He struck an agreement to settle the case. His lawyer told the judge at the time that Daniel had a drug addiction, and it was only made worse by the fact his mother died. After Daniel completed probation, including a treatment program, the charges were dismissed. Guy Fronston says the arrests were a police tactic, a futile one, meant to shake loose any bit of information in Randy's death. He said the cops even listened to the Gorenbergs' conversations in jail. But Franzen says. Because the father and son didn't have anything to do with the killing, the investigators' efforts went nowhere.
The only reason they charged Daniel Gorenberg with crimes is because they were hoping to pressure him and scare him into confessing to the murder of his mother or to giving them information that led them to convict the father of murdering Randy. But the truth is, charges never should have been filed against Daniel. It was a strong-arm tactic to get Daniel to crack or to convict his father of a crime when neither of those scenarios really occurred. Daniel was not responsible, nor is Dr. Stuart Gorenberg responsible for this crime.
It wasn't the last time the sheriff's office brought up Stuart Gorenberg's name. A year after Randy's death, Sheriff's Detective William Springer held a news conference to present a new theory. He said it was possible that Randy's killer was actually after Stuart instead. Detective Springer made an astonishing public allegation that Stuart had been involved with a prostitute and had been in contact with one even after Randy's killing. The Mercedes that Randy Gorenberg was kidnapped in was registered to Stuart. And because Stuart also used the Mercedes, he may have been the attacker's intended target. Here's Detective Springer describing that to reporters back in 2008.
He could have very well been targeted by somebody that knew he was going there, visiting these ladies, and may have followed him.
But lawyer Fronston said that the prostitution allegation was another desperate and misguided attempt to show the media that police were making progress. Fronston said Stuart was a chiropractor who believed in the benefits of massage therapy.
Somewhere along the line, law enforcement decided that these massages were sexual in nature, and they had a press conference and talked about Dr. Gorenberg and accused Dr. Gorenberg of getting these massages with prostitutes while he was married, and that they continued after his wife had been murdered, and that he did them extensively. Well, at the end of the day, there was zero evidence to support that. There was, again, no evidence whatsoever that Dr. Gorenberg frequented prostitutes.
Fronston said the police had nothing on the Gorenbergs. But the damage was done. He says the investigators' allegations took a toll on the husband and son of Randy Gorenberg.
They did some things in this case that really were inexcusable and really had a lifelong impact. Dr. Gorenberg has never practiced his medicine again. He was basically forced into retirement as a result of this arrest, even though charges were dismissed, just like they were in his son's case. So the price that both Daniel and Stuart Gorenberg paid for these trumped-up charges was lifelong, and in addition to the loss of their loved one, which is completely unacceptable.
The tips about Randy Gorenberg's death didn't stop. In September 2008, more than a year after Randy Gorenberg's killing, mysterious charges appeared on her credit card. Her husband discovered the charges while he was reviewing a statement from the previous month. The discovery gave police one more lead to follow. Her credit card number had been used to buy $1,000 worth of video game systems and food in Connecticut and Massachusetts. Detectives traced the charges to 2 men. But the card had been stolen, and there was nothing to link the men to Randy's murder. The lead didn't go anywhere. New theories about what happened to Randy Gorenberg would emerge over the years that followed. In 2011, police identified a fugitive as a person of interest. A jailhouse informant came forward, claiming to have overheard members of a gang taking responsibility for Randy's killing. The informant said a man named Michael Barrera was the gunman. Barrera, then 33, was believed to travel between Mexico and South Florida. On the day of the killing, a Chrysler 200 was caught on security camera, following closely behind her Mercedes SUV. A relative of Michael Barrera owned a similar car, and Barrera was wanted in a string of other crimes. But investigators could come up with no proof that he was involved with Randy's killing, and no charges were ever brought. Yet another dead end. Stuart Gorenberg's lawyer, Guy Fronston, thinks police made several crucial errors in their investigation. First, he says, the narrow focus on Stuart and Daniel were a distraction that made investigators lose crucial time. And splitting up the task force that was investigating all 3 kidnapping cases was a mistake.
And there's absolutely no reason whatsoever why these 2 agencies shouldn't have worked together to solve the crime. In my opinion, there is no good basis for the task force to have been disassembled.
Randy's brother, Jerry Mallitz, is frustrated by the unanswered questions. The similarities among the Boca Mall attacks aren't enough to convince him that the other cases in 2007 are linked to his sister's murder.
I don't think there's any relationship between the two myself. I'm not an investigator, and I'm not a detective, but I don't think one has anything to do with the other.
There are questions that stand out to him to this day. Why didn't the kidnapper or kidnappers take many of the valuables that Randy had in her possession?
The murderers didn't take the car. They didn't take the ring, which was probably worth a whole lot of money. They didn't take much of anything. There's really no, the motive wasn't financial gain because they left all the financial gain behind.
Whatever the motive was, one thing remains clear. The man or men responsible for the Boca Mall murders in 2007 were never caught. They are 3 chilling, unsolved cases that still haunt South Florida to this day. Six episodes, 6 murder victims. Butch Casey, Marie Rogers, Sharon Anderson, Randy Gorenberg,